Hare Krishna. So I was asked to speak about how I came to Krishna Consciousness. I started chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra in 1980. At that time, Russia or Soviet Union was a strictly atheistic country. I was brought up in atheistic family. My mother, father were atheists. My grandmother, grandfather were atheists. My grandmother used to go to church, and being a young boy, I would preach to her that there is no God, because I was very strictly indoctrinated in these atheistic concepts. When I entered university, Moscow State University, there was an incident which was the few incidents which were turning points in my relationship to God. One was that I met with one student in the university who believed in God. What happened, he was passing the exam on the scientific atheism. That was the subject which everyone had to pass. And during this exam, he admitted that he believes in God. And it was a big scandal. There were probably around 20,000 students in Moscow State University at that time. Only one was bold enough to say that he believes in God. So he was kicked out from the university shortly after that. But before that, I had a conversation with him. He was my, co-student from the same faculty, and he gave me gospel, and I read gospel, and I was touched. It was not possible to read gospels or Bible otherwise. And that made me think, because he was quite an interesting man and very reasonable. So that was the beginning. What happened after that, and by the end of my studies in the university, my roommate went to the book fair, international book fair, and Bhakti Vedanta Book Trust had a stall in this book fair. They were giving out Bhagavad Gitas and giving some prasadam, and somehow or other he got the prasadam and he got some book and he met with the devotees. But he kept quiet. But all of a sudden he became a vegetarian. All of a sudden some changes in his life took place, and he was my roommate, and I was intrigued by the changes which were taking place in his life. And he had a great deal of integrity, and because of this integrity, I respected him very much. So when he became vegetarian, I became vegetarian practically immediately, just because of respect to him, without, getting into his reasons and everything like this. So that was something. But he was keeping it very quiet. He was not explaining this. Still, I was following. Many years later, in fact, recently, I encountered a passage from Bhakti Sandarbha of Jiva Goswami, where he explains how the Shraddha of faith is being developed due to respect. That initial respect towards a devotee is a seed of faith and Krishna consciousness. So it was exactly my case. I believed into something because I respected him, not because I believed into something. I didn't believe myself, but I was ready to try. So what happened after that, I became vegetarian, and then at one point we were living in the same room, and he didn't know that I was in the room. We were living in adjacent rooms, actually. He didn't know that I was in my room, and he started taking shower, and under the shower he was chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And I was sitting in my room and I was listening, and I thought, he went crazy. This is really too much. Why is he doing this? Anyway, we went our ways. I went for postgraduate studies in the university, but of course, at one point I had a crisis. At one point I lost meaning of everything which I was doing. And exactly at that point, and it came to a very acute extent, I was crying basically, and I was more or less praying to God, even though I didn't know that this is God and I am praying, but there was somewhat similar mood. I was praying to God, what is the meaning of my life? Why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What is the use of all this? It was really an acute crisis in my life because everything went all right, but at the same time I lost sense. I lost the meaning of my life. So immediately after that, it's interesting because Krishna really responds to sincere prayers. Just a couple of days after, my friend came to me. He arrived from a different city where he was working at that time. And he took me to a program. It was a program which was arranged by devotees in some hostel. And it was a very strange program, extremely strange program. I couldn't understand. I couldn't relate to it at all. You know, they were saying something, but the main point which they were saying that you should chant this Hare Krishna mantra. And by that time I was ready because I thought that, you know, it's already going to drain, so why not try? And my friend gave me Bhagavad Gita. It was not Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. It was a very crude Russian translation of Bhagavad Gita done before the revolution by Theosophic Society. It was not even translated from Sanskrit. It was translated from the English translation or French translation into Russian. So it was double translation, but still I was very impressed by this little book. What I could see, because I had scientific background, I could see that this is a very logical and rational explanation of a completely different worldview. The worldview where God is there, where God is the center, but at the same time it's rational. We used to think that if anything is connected with religion, it should be rational, it should be just grounded in superstitions and everything. And at the same time, immediately at the same time, together with the book, he gave me beads and said I should chant Hare Krishna mantra. So this impulse which I get, impetus which I got from Bhagavad Gita, that I should change something in my life, was immediately realized into this chanting process. I started changing something in my life by chanting Hare Krishna mantra without even knowing who is Krishna, because in this vague translation of somebody, you know, Krishna was not really emphasized, definitely not as much as in Prabhupada's translation. So I was chanting it as a sort of a mystical practice, and I was chanting it and chanting, but immediately, practically from the day one, I started chanting 16 rounds because I wanted to find out what is it all about. And I was chanting and chanting and chanting. And gradually, my friend introduced me to some other early devotees in Soviet Union. I would go to their programs, and because they were from a different background, it was difficult for me to relate to them. And their talks were very strange to me. But still, you know, I was in their kirtans and everything. But what really actually pushed me into Krishna consciousness was 3 years later, in 1983. By that time I was associating with devotees, but cursorily, not very deeply. I didn't have any commitment or whatever. I was still in the category of somebody who is still exploring something, and I was not really serious at all. But at that time the KGB officer came to my postgraduate studies place, and KGB at that time was completely all-powerful. It was almighty representative of God in the Soviet Union, because everyone was totally controlled by the KGB. And when I came to work and to do my studies, my scientific guide, he was very, I could see he was afraid. He was shaking, and he said, "Somebody came to you." And I didn't know who it was. And it was the KGB man. He was huge. He was very fat and tall. And initially he was very nice, and he said, we know that you are engaged with these people, and we also know that you are a very reasonable and intelligent young man. You please report to us whatever is happening there. And you don't have to agree immediately, but we would like you to report, and if you do this, we will give you some benefits. You will defend your degree easier, and if you don't do this, we'll put you in prison ultimately. You know what it is. In a very casual way, he described to me two paths, and I had to choose one of those. And purposefully, I think he left a few days for me to decide, because he knew the psychology of people. When people encountered with such a, perspective, they tend to become very worried. And sure enough, I was very worried. I was really worried. My conscience didn't allow me to go the path and become a KGB reporter. It was something, which I would never do. But at the same time, I didn't want to be put in prison either. So I was in a fix. So what happened to me, and at that time already, KGB was very actively working on the devotees, and some devotees were already put in prison. And basically every time you would meet with a devotee, he would tell something about KGB, how the KGB would come, how they would stop the program, how they confiscated some literature, or how they interrogated this and that. It was full of this. So I decided to consult with one of those devotees, and it happened to be a very young girl. I respected her, and I met with her. She was the most intelligent, in my opinion, at that time among Russian devotees. And she was only 19 years old, and I asked her, the KGB came to me, and they want to put me in prison. And she went like this, phew, so what? They cannot do anything to your soul. And the way she said it, and was very convincing. And I said, yeah, right, she's right. I cannot do anything to my soul. So that was on the day, or maybe the day before, when I was supposed to come to their place and report about my decision, whether I want to be their, informer, or I want to be put in prison ultimately, as they said to me. So I came, and I was very bold. Immediately, it's amazing how the potency in the words are there. I was very bold and determined, even though before that I was totally in anxiety about the whole thing. So I came to them in their place, and they smiled at me and said, so what is your decision? I said, I'm not going to do this, which you want me to do. This is against my principles. Whew. He became furious. He started yelling at me. And I still remember how he yelled at me, what are your principles besides the 4 regulative ones? So he was well informed about the devotional practice at that time. Anyways, so since that first encounter, my engagement, so to speak, with the KGB started. And soon after, a few months after that first encounter, there was a big court case where I believe around a dozen of devotees were put in prison. And because I was still not very much involved, I was just a witness, and I was interrogated many times. But the more they pushed on me, the more serious I would become as a devotee, because my rationale was that, I don't take these devotees seriously, but the KGB takes them very seriously, and they must know better. They're definitely much more informed than I am, so if they take it seriously, I should also take it seriously. That was my understanding of the whole situation. So ever since, I consider KGB one of my Shiksha gurus, who helped me in my devotional practices and made me more serious. And so many other things happened after that, but definitely it was a very strong push in the right direction. I became more serious and I was more seriously involved. And even though they never put me in prison, because it was by the end of the whole Soviet era, and perestroika was about to start. I think it started in 85 or 86. But they did kick me out from my job, and I started traveling with devotees. But whatever they would do, they would only help me spiritually. So I'm really thankful to them for doing it to me, because I don't know whether I would become serious if it was not for the KGB involvement in my life. And then ultimately, after that, I was more and more serious, even though, as I said, I practically started chanting Hare Krishna mantra, 16 rounds Hare Krishna mantra from the day one, or almost day one. Yeah, and then there was some other things, but ultimately, through the arrangements of devotees, I got initiation, and I went abroad to Sweden, where I started translating Prabhupada's books into Russian, and my life made a very significant change, 180-degree change. So that's more or less the story. Hare Krishna.